Collins.
Good morning, everybody, and glad to have you aboard, my friends. I am Big Chuck. Hopefully you know who you are. Well, I mentioned this during the week that I couldn't wait to get my hands on this, a brand new book out about the history of Delaware County. It's absolutely jam-packed with photographs, tidbits, history. I have the authors in here. Tim Durden and Ray Lefevre join us this morning. From the Delaware County Historical Association. They do a great job, of course, over there, and it's good to see both of you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. All right, Ray, let's start with you. What was your what did you do for this book?
I mainly scanned the photographs.
Yeah.
And the publisher had very set guidelines on how to do the scanning, and they were actually wonderful. They were wonderful guidelines because now I'm scanning everything the way they told me to scan.
Oh, is that right?
And we focused solely on pictures in our collection because we had a lot of pictures that had not seen the light of day.
Yeah.
And so this was a golden opportunity to get some of those pictures out there. So we did the scanning. The publisher was very impressed with the quality, if I do say so myself.
How many
I do.
How many pictures are in here?
It's over 200. I want to say it's probably in the 220s, something like that.
I can only imagine what you didn't include. It must have been difficult saying this one but not this one.
Yeah. We had a lot of railroad ones, and we had to edit some of them out. So it's like, okay, well, which one? And we wanted to keep a geographic spread as much as we could because we wanted to include every place in Delaware County. Well, I don't know if we hit every place, but again, it depended whether we had the picture or not.
That's I think it's just awesome. Tim, come on up a little bit to the microphone here. Tim, you and I have worked together before, and this is just a magnificent product. Is there a template that you follow? Does it? I mean, I've scanned through it. Do we start with the earliest days and end up into more current days? Is that how you work on this book?
There's something of a template, yeah. I mean, the publishing company, Arcadia Publications, gave us a template that we had to follow up to a point, but we also had a little bit of a leeway in what we decided to include. There are 6 chapters in the book, and they were really up to us what we included in those chapters. As for chronology, the first chapter details the creation of the 19 towns in Delaware County, beginning with the original 6 in 1797. And,
off the top of your head, can you tell us the 6?
Let me see. Courtright, Harpersfield, and Franklin, and Stamford, Middletown, and Colchester. And those 6 towns were actually the first 3 towns that I mentioned were once part of Otsego County, and the final 3 were once part of Ulster County.
Interesting.
So that's the first chapter, and we tried to show the creation of the what will end up as being the 19 towns in a chronological fashion. Yes.
The thing I like about here is there are so many agricultural pictures in here, which seems to be disappearing, maybe coming back. The small farms, anyway, that we all grew up with, and even the predecessors of that. It's just amazing, some of these pictures that you have of these absolute sprawling farms in Delaware County. I mean, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's. I guess it's hard to do a history of any type of Delaware County without obviously including a lot of farms and a lot of agriculture, because that's really not just Delaware counties, but this area's history and its heritage, of course. So, yeah, a lot of farming pictures.
Yeah, and they're great pictures, Ray, because, for example, any of these, it really is a time capsule. It's like one of those little snow globes that you can shake with the little snow in it, because it really does take you back to a different time. There's no question about that. I mean, in real sense and in romantic sense, if you will, pictures of people working together on the farms. You know, I mean, you can open up any page in here and you'll see like people pulling in hay and stuff like that. And it's all the neighbors and the kids and the women and everybody coming to do that, whether it's gathering ice or community events. It just was really, really close-knit. I think it had to be, right? It had to be close-knit. You couldn't do it alone.
No, it would be absolutely impossible to do it alone. And I think, so you'd work on one farm one day, and then sometimes, then, okay, now tomorrow we're going to go to so-and-so's farm, and we'll all take in their hay. And then the following day, of course, it's also kind of why they had the big families back then, is part of it was to create a labor force. and it sounds kind of crass, but that's really what they were doing to have enough people to keep the farm going. So yeah, we had lots of farming pictures and some very neat ones. The one challenge with the book is, given that the era of photography isn't really getting until around the 1850s when it's prevalent, is trying to show at least some representation from pre-photographs. And there's not a lot of that, but there is some, mostly related to the anti-rent war. But some of the real early farming, there was a lot of sheep farming around where I live, but we don't really have any photographic documentation of that. We just know it. By the time the photographs came out, they were starting to be supplanted by cows.
Interesting. Tim, I've talked before about this, and maybe even you and I, but certainly with politicians who've represented Delaware County, whatever. It's absolutely vast. The county, people, unless you stop and think about it, it's like going over to Delaware. All right, I'm going to Franklin. All right, well, how about going from Davenport to Margaretville or whatever?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, that's like a 4-day trip.
Sure, it's well, it's.
I lived in Sydney, up in that corner. Go from Sydney to Grand Gorge, down in that area.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long way.
Or try Sydney to, I don't know, let's see, Arkville or Fleischmann.
That's a
heck
long
of a long
way.
way. Yeah, I mean, it sounds funny to say that's a 4-day trip today, but it really was until about 100 or so years ago. Transportation is one of the chapters in our book. And I think I like to think we do a good job in showing in a pictorial sense and also with our captions how difficult it was just to move around here in the Catskills, again, until about, 110 years ago.
Some of the chapters are 19 towns is the first one, using the land. That'll be farming and agriculture. Getting around, that's the transportation that you just mentioned. Business and industry, I haven't read the whole book. Is Scintilla in here?
Yeah, it is. Actually, the final chapter in the book is since 1945 or since World War II. Actually, you'll be happy to hear, Chuck, that there's quite a few photographs of Sydney in that chapter. Yeah,
Excellent.
Scintilla is included.
Is this an impossible question? I'll start with you, Ray. What's your favorite part of this book? Do you have a favorite?
I've been saying this to people. The cover. Actually, I love the cover. The cover is the last Old Home Day in Cannonsville in 1956. Shortly after that Old Home Day, people started to move out because they tore the town down to create the Cannonsville Reservoir. And I just think it's a really iconic, when you see the picture, it's just, there's a flag and a parade and people all celebrating. I'm embarrassed to say I do not know who took that picture. It's in our collection, and we've used it before, but we have a lot of pictures from a gentleman named Bob Wire.
Yeah.
This is not one of his.
Yeah.
It's just, there's about 5 or 6 in that series, and they're just great shots of that last Old Home Day. It was so the cover in a lot of ways reflects one of the major impacts on Delaware County, the reservoirs. And at the same time, you can see the terrain. And fortunately, Tim and I both said this was our number one choice. We had to give them like 10 images, but the publisher agreed very quickly that was the most striking image for the cover. So yeah, I have to say that I'm really happy
I have
with the
never
cover.
seen this photograph before, and it's breathtaking in its clarity. It's a very poignant, knowing the backstory, knowing that the town and everybody. But let me stop for a second here. All right, the authors of Tim and Ray have generously given me 3 books. They're signed by both of them. I'm going to tell you tomorrow how to get these folks. I want to put them up online and let you try a chance there, only because I want to be able to link the book to the website so that you can go and look at it, maybe buy it, make a great gift for people who are from Delaware County or maybe now live in Florida or live far away. This is just a real memory album. But this one picture of this final Old Home Day in Cannonsville is very, very emotional to look at it, knowing that all of these people, and folks will see this when I put this up tomorrow, there's 100 people in this picture. You see firemen, you see onlookers, you see children and babies, that they would have all moved shortly after this. They would have had to have moved shortly after this.
The last, I don't think we have a picture of that, but when they had the parade, the last thing in the parade were a couple of young boys dressed as fish, because they were basically, this was the future of Cannonsville. It was going to be full of fish.
Interesting.
And so
Paper mache fish, so we can only imagine how that would have looked.
Unbelievable. All right, let me go to Tim now. Tim, favorite part for you in this book here? A chapter, a subject, a photograph?
Yeah, actually, I think I really enjoyed doing the final chapter, the one that I was just mentioning, since 1945, because I think, as Ray's already mentioned, all the photos are from our archives at DCHA at the museum. And some of those photos I don't think I'd seen before in that final chapter. So I guess I would have to say it was probably that one. I also enjoyed doing the chapter on getting around, or transportation. That was a lot of good photos of cars and trains and people on horses and wagons.
Interesting. I have to tell you what I like. That is a good chapter too, and people with history and very older folks will enjoy all the chapters, and especially the ones before that. But for those of us not quite so old, for me to see pictures of the construction of SUNY Delhi, for example, a lot of fireman photographs in here. I'm looking at one of the Sydney Volunteer Fire Department from 1965. I see my old pal Ed Mason in here. He was the first politician I ever knew. And he would come to Sydney, and I'd watch him as he would march in a parade. The minute somebody raised a camera, he grabbed a kid and a hot dog. Every time. He did.
Yeah, he's a politician, or he was a politician.
And he was a big supporter of DCHA. Yeah. I think he helped them get their permanent charter and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that picture of him in there is at the Frisbee House at some event.
Mm-hmm. And also... of course, the courthouse square in Delhi. I was just talking about this the other day with somebody. Maybe one of the great iconic buildings, that courthouse, that big red brick courthouse with the gazebo out front. It landed on the front cover of Saturday Evening Post. Are you kidding me? And also, and again, I had just written about this too, about the Seven Sons of Sydney Center, and I see the dedication in here of the Sydney Center Vietnam plaque, or the memorial plaque over there. 7 boys over there, of course, we know died within 51 days of each other, so that tragedy over there. And so we follow this all the way through, and we see so many things in here that are, to me, I'm sure it plays out in other rural counties all over the country, but to me, to see pictures of people riding through town with the deer over the hood, to see the milk cans, being hauled in, and ice being chopped, it just seems so quaint now.
Yeah, it seems that's how it strikes me often, and not just by looking at the photos in this book, but Ray mentioned the Bob Wire book that we produced at the end of 2015. And in general, from many of our other photos, you get an idea of I don't know, dare I say it, a more relaxed way of life 50, 60 and more years ago, maybe less rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but even from the photos, you can kind of get an idea of people driving around in cars without seat belts, and kids loaded in the back of station wagons or the back of trucks. And you just don't see that really anymore.
One thing I think that really comes through in this book, Ray, is even from way back in the pioneer days with the early 6 towns or whatever, and it seems very well documented in here, is a very cantankerous neighbor of Delaware County all of these centuries has been the weather. And it's reflected in some very graphic photographs of floods I didn't know about, blizzards I didn't know about, fires, maybe not weather related there, but some of those tragedies are really reflected in pretty gripping photos in here.
We had debated doing a chapter on just disasters, but we kind of thought that just having a chapter called disasters was kind of a downer, so we folded it in. But we had a gentleman just last week doing research at the Historical Association. He's looking at weather trends and significant weather events in the Catskills, and he's looking at some of our old diaries. And he was mentioning a bunch of weather, including there was a famous heavy rainfall in October 1903 that hit just as a car endurance race was coming through Delaware County, and it made it a miserable trek getting through Delaware County because a lot of the roads were still dirt, so they were mud. And we've been learning just recently. We've had a researcher who is really into this and is hoping to recreate the endurance run, I think, next year. Yeah. And
was it inter Delaware County, intra? Where did it start? In New York City?
It started in Weehawken, New Jersey. This was October of 1903, and it came up to Kingston and then through the Catskills on what's now Route 28. Fortunately, it didn't come through Oneonta. It got to Delhi and then went generally due west to Franklin, Unadilla, Binghamton, Buffalo, and then it ended up in Pittsburgh. And I forget the numbers of automobiles that began, but most actually made it. As Ray said, coming through the Catskills in October of 1903, it was variously described in the local newspapers as being monsoon-like. And these were people riding around in open-top cars, again on dirt roads, having to be pulled out with horses and wagons, and relying on the local population sometimes to get through the mud and the slop. They nicknamed it the Mudlark soon after the end of the race.
Fascinating. We those that follow history and are interested in the stories, we know about the early days. We know about the violence in the early days in establishing our country and our state and all of that. The anti-rent war, of course, is a big footnote in history. One thing I did not know, however, and if I may, I'll just read this caption from one of the pages in here. Tensions reached their boiling point in the county during a milk strike in the summer of 1939, with numerous acts of violence carried out by farmers and their supporters on both sides of the issue. Shown above, and it reflects a frightening photograph. That's the only way I can describe it. Shown above, striking farmers armed with sticks and weapons aimed to shut down the production of milk in Delaware County. Shown below, referring to the following picture, convoys of milk trucks guarded by police became a common sight in Delaware County and throughout upstate New York in the mid-1930s. And I have to tell you, the picture on the top of open-air 1930 jalopies filled with men with guns is pretty scary. I never knew about this.
And there were actually, because this wasn't just Delaware County, there was a series of milk strikes starting, I want to say probably even in the 20s, and definitely in the 30s into the 40s. And I don't know if we put any in the book or not. In our Bob Wire book, we have pictures of the 41 strike, and what they were doing there was dumping the load. So you see these pictures of these trucks with milk just cascading off them. And they they strike for about a week or so, and I'm still trying to get my hand around the whole issue, but a lot of it was just the fact that these farmers just were getting less than what they were putting into to produce the milk.
Yeah. And
they were getting kind of desperate in terms of, it was impacting their livelihood major. And so... Yeah, I think I was surprised at how many we came across, and I'm the historian in Bovina and was actually rather startled to see that there was at least one incident in Bovina.
Really?
So it was around in the county, but it was also a thing going around in New York State in general. There were a series of these milk strikes, and some of them were more localized, and some were broader.
It's quite a picture, though, to see that. I mean, you can only imagine that rumbling in a movie scene, rumbling down a back country road around Andes or something.
and I mean, the pictures are pretty evocative of what actually happened. I think it's true to say that in Delaware County there were no actual deaths during any of these milk strikes, whereas in some other counties there were people who were killed and otherwise, beaten up pretty severely. I think it was Sheriff Austin of Walton, who was the Delaware County Sheriff in the late 30s, who commended the people of Delaware County during the milk strikes for kind of restraining themselves. Even though the pictures show intimidation and potential violence, there really wasn't too much. Ray said about the dumping of the milk, and those are pretty evocative photos also. Yeah.
The one of our last segments that we'll touch on here is early education in Delaware County, and of course today many of the buildings are gone. Many of the buildings are still standing. I'm thinking of Franklin, of course. I don't think people can realize how big the Delaware Literary Institute was in its day, and I spoke over in Franklin once at that building. And I had done some research before, and I believe, I may be wrong on this, I know I have some Franklin listeners who are going to correct me on this, I believe 6 U.S. congressmen came out of the Delaware County Literary Institute. And people don't even know what it is today, except it's that magnificent building over there in Franklin, of course. But the evolution of higher education, teacher education in Delaware County is really quite significant.
The thing I was interested with the Franklin Institute was I noticed that a number of people from Bovina went to it, and I thought they went to the Delaware Literary Institute in Franklin instead of going to Delaware Academy, but they were cranking out people who went to Hamilton College to become ministers, and so there was a big connection there. And but I know some about it, and I think I'm learning more. And the 6th congressman, that wouldn't really surprise me.
I've never heard that, Chuck, about the 6th congressman, and I'm maybe ashamed to say that I live across the street from the Franklin School, in the village of Franklin, but I've never heard that.
It's interesting. There was also, I did not know this, that there was a Teachers Institute in Stamford. In Andes, we had things. It's just a great book. You guys did a great job. Some of the neatest photographs, and of course, it seems so dusty and distant now, the Civil War, but not necessarily the Civil War itself, but the Civil War veterans pictures that you have in here, and it's just mind blowing to see Civil War reunions in Delhi, for example, and you got 60 people show up to it. It's just amazing. One last thing I'll mention here is George Dugan. This is a great picture. A picture of an old guy sitting on a fence, and he's got a Union Army uniform on with his medals and his hat. And the caption is, Delaware County's last surviving old soldier, George Dugan. He had served for 3 years in the 51st New York Infantry Regiment, incurring a wound in his leg during that time. After the Civil War, Irish native Dugan lived in several places around Delaware County, settling for some time in Harpersfield. This again, Bob Wire, who was a saint, of course, for what he did, took this picture of him in the spring of 1941, just before he died in Roxbury. At the time of the picture, he was 102. That is a great story. Now, when you were doing this book, did you uncover that story? Or were you always familiar with that story?
That one
I wondered what you really uncovered as
That particular one we sort of knew, but I would also say that as we were going through pictures, in fact, back to the car thing, I think we had a picture in there of a car, and it said on the back it was from that race. But we had someone who knew cars who said, it can't be because that car is like a 1906 or something like that.
There's always that guy,
so we corrected the caption, but because sometimes on the back of the picture someone will have written what it is, but they aren't always right.
Well, congratulations, you guys. I'm sure that this is for sale at the Delaware County Historical Association. I know that you'll get it in the Green Toad here in Oneonta for all of our Oneonta folks to be able to go down. Amazon, is it possible yet on Amazon? Just go to Amazon and just look up Delaware County and you'll see it. And again, the photograph on the front is nothing short of breathtaking in its poignancy. The last old home day in Cannonsville. I just think that's great. Thank you for the books. We'll give those away tomorrow. And I appreciate it, you guys. Congratulations. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you for having us, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck.
My pleasure. Delaware County, of course, as all of my listeners know, that's my county, and I've always been a fan of it for sure. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I am Big Chuck. Stay with me, and I'll be right back.
Hey, hiring people is probably the worst part of my job.
We started using ZipRecruiter about 3 months ago. One click and my job was posted to